The party was beautiful. 43 colleagues, cake with his name on it, a card signed by everyone on the floor. His boss said he was irreplaceable. His wife cried happy tears. His kids flew in from two different states. And that night, after everyone went home and the house got quiet, Walter sat in his backyard alone and felt something he did not expect. Something he couldn't name. Something that felt embarrassingly close to grief. Walter had worked for 41 years. He wasn't someone who defined himself by his job, or so he thought. He had hobbies, friends outside work, a full life by any measure. But in those first weeks after retirement, something kept happening that he couldn't explain. He'd wake up at 6:15, the same time he'd woken up for 4 decades, and lie there staring at the ceiling. Not because he had somewhere to be, because he didn't. His wife was thrilled for him. His kids kept calling to ask how retirement felt, and Walter kept saying the same thing. It's great, really great. Because what else do you say? You can't tell people you feel like something died. Not when that something was a job. Not when you chose this. Not when everyone keeps telling you how lucky you are. Here's what nobody tells you about retirement. Grief doesn't only happen when someone dies. Grief happens whenever something that mattered ends. A career that spanned 4 decades, one that shaped your days, your friendships, your sense of usefulness, your very understanding of who you are in the world. That is not a small thing to leave behind. Even when you're ready to leave it, even when you chose to leave it, even when you're genuinely grateful it's over. Psychologists who study life transitions call this an ambiguous loss. It's grief without a clear object. There's no funeral for a career, no casseroles from neighbors. No one calls to check how you're holding up 3 weeks after your last day. The world expects you to be celebrating, and part of you is. But another part of you is quietly mourning something real and has absolutely nowhere to put that feeling. So most people do what Walter did. They say it's great, really great, and they sit with it alone. There are at least 3 reasons this particular grief is so hard to name out loud. The first is gratitude pressure. When you've worked hard your whole life and finally reached retirement, a milestone millions of people never get to, there is an enormous unspoken pressure to feel only grateful. To feel anything other than grateful can feel like ingratitude, like complaining about winning. The second is identity confusion. For most of your working life, you had a clear answer to the question the world asks most. What do you do? That answer organized your sense of self in ways you didn't fully realize until it was gone. Grieving the loss of that answer isn't weakness. It's honesty about how deeply work becomes woven into identity over decades. The third is the loneliness of it. Retirement grief is almost entirely private. Your colleagues have moved on. Your family is celebrating. Your friends who haven't retired yet don't quite understand. And the culture offers almost no language for what you're experiencing. No ritual, no acknowledged mourning period, no permission to feel the loss alongside the relief. So it sits in your chest unnamed. And unnamed feelings have a way of getting heavier over time. 6 weeks into retirement, Walter's wife sat down next to him one evening and said something simple. You don't seem like yourself. Not in a bad way, just different. What's actually going on? And Walter, who had been performing fine for 6 weeks, told the truth for the first time. He said he felt like he was mourning something he wasn't allowed to mourn, that he missed being needed in a specific way, that he felt guilty for missing it, that the freedom he'd worked toward for decades felt, at least right now, like being untethered rather than liberated. His wife didn't tell him he was wrong to feel that way. She didn't remind him of everything he had to be grateful for. She just said, that sounds really hard and really lonely to carry by yourself. And something in Walter loosened. Not because the feeling went away, but because it finally had a name and a witness.
The research on retirement adjustment is consistent on a few things. The first is permission. Giving yourself explicit permission to grieve the career, not just celebrate leaving it, is the single most important step. Not because wallowing helps, but because unfelt grief doesn't disappear. It just goes underground and expresses itself as irritability, restlessness, or a low-level sadness that never quite lifts. You are allowed to miss what you built. You are allowed to mourn what ended. Those feelings don't cancel out gratitude. They exist alongside it. The second is naming it to someone, not to get advice, not to be talked out of it, just to say it out loud to another person who can hear it without flinching. A spouse, a friend, a therapist, a support group for people navigating retirement transitions. Any of these work. The act of naming it to a witness changes something in how it sits in the body. The third is patience with the timeline. Most people who navigate retirement grief well report that the disorientation of the first year gives way to something genuinely different in year two. Not because the grief disappears, but because new anchors get built. New sources of identity and purpose slowly take shape. The open space that felt terrifying starts to feel like possibility. But that transition takes time, and it cannot be rushed by pretending the grief isn't there. Walter still wakes up at 6:15 most mornings. Old habits are stubborn that way. But now he has somewhere to be. Not an office, just somewhere, something. A reason the day has a shape. He volunteers 2 mornings a week. He's slowly building a woodworking space in his garage. He and his wife started walking every evening after dinner. Small things, but anchors. And he has stopped pretending the first months were easy. When people ask how retirement is going now, he tells them the truth. The first few months were harder than I expected. Nobody warned me about that part, but I'm finding my way. And sometimes, when someone he knows is about to retire, he pulls them aside and says something nobody said to him. It might feel like grief at first. That's normal. Give yourself permission to feel it. If this is where you are right now, if you're carrying something that feels like grief but doesn't have a name yet, know that what you're feeling is real and it is allowed, and you are not alone in it. Leave a comment and tell us what the first months of retirement actually felt like for you. We read every single one.